The smiling girl in the photo is named Tetiana Litvinova from Zrivnogo, a happy mother of 4 children. In fact, 2 of them were born in SIZO. After all, Tetiana at the age of 23 killed her own husband. The court proceedings in her case lasted for more than 6 years, and the verdict shocked many. I guess you are surprised too. So sit back, dear ones, because this is terrifying. So in the photo you see now, there is a couple who were once happily married. The woman is Tetiana, and next to her is her husband Serhiy Litvinov. Serhiy was well known in Rivne, as he was a fairly famous hairdresser stylist there who had worked in his field for many years and even had his own salon called Serge. Serhiy's mother, Sofia Zygmundivna, previously worked in this field, and her son followed her path. Mrs. Sofia described her son as a golden child. She said that they lived well and everything was for him. But even so, Serhiy started working very early. However, even if everything was going well for the man in business, things were not so rosy in his personal life. The marriage with Tetiana became the second for Perukar. Before that, Serhiy had been married to a woman named Natalia. Together they raised a son whom they named after his father, Serhiy. The marriage did not work out and the couple separated. The child stayed with his mother and Serhiy became single again. However, this did not last long because soon the hairdresser met Tetiana, the very same one. Despite the age difference, which is 14 years, they liked each other and started dating. Soon they got married, and the young couple had their first child, a boy. Tetiana was 20, and Serhiy was 34 at the time. And a year and a half later, their second son was born. Whether the Litvinov family lived well together all this time is unknown. But according to the neighbors, their life was definitely not quiet and peaceful. Well, at first, of course, everything was fine. As their marriage progressed, arguments and shouting from their apartment became more frequent, leaving one to speculate about the reasons. What are the common reasons for this in Ukrainian families, and in families in general around the world? Maybe it's about small children, taking care of them is quite a challenge. Maybe it's about money, which is also not uncommon, although there is no information that the family had any financial difficulties. It is likely that the couple could not get along because of each other's personalities, but Tetiana herself said that her husband Serhiy was incredibly jealous, and that was the reason they constantly had arguments. Whatever the real reason was, around the middle of 2016 the couple separated. On paper their marriage remained intact. Officially, they did not dissolve it. However, when the following events occurred, they had been living apart for 8 months. Serhiy visited Tetiana and the children from time to time. Tetiana's neighbors, who seemed to be quite inquisitive, confirmed this themselves as it was difficult to hide anything from them. Svetlana Palenko, a nearby resident, recalls that Serhiy was a very caring father, among his other qualities. He always came, brought money, and looked after the children. And it must be acknowledged, he was a good father. But something went wrong. February 8, 2017 was an ordinary working day for Serhiy Litvinov. It was a Wednesday. So there were appointments at the hair salon, although it wasn't mandatory, but still, a few clients had reserved a spot for themselves. Despite the fact that Serhiy was the owner of the salon, he still served clients, as he was a hairdresser stylist with considerable experience and loved his work. But work is work and children are sacred. Serhiy's mother said the following. He would call the girls from the hair salon and say, "I have a client scheduled, so if I'm not there, let them wait 5 minutes because I'm going to Tanya, bringing food to the children." However, when the client arrived, he waited not for 5 or even 10 minutes, but much longer. When Serhiy's colleagues called him to find out when he would finally return to work, the man's phone was already unreachable. Serhiy really did come to Tetiana with the children. At that time, they lived in a high-rise building on Plastova Street. And he really did go inside. He even had a conversation with his ex, or almost ex-wife. In fact, in raised voices. Shortly after the door closed behind the man, an argument began between the almost ex-couple, which escalated into a quarrel and shouting. This time, the neighbors didn't just hear insults thrown at each other, it seemed that one of them was in mortal danger. And that person was Serhiy. He was in danger. He shouted, "Pyo, people help! They're killing me!" A neighbor, upon hearing screams from the Litvinovics' apartment, rushed over and knocked on their door. But there was only silence in response. Complete silence. Here are the neighbors' recollections. There was violence in that apartment. A man shouted for help, saying they were killing him. I stopped, as if I couldn't hear him anymore. The situation seemed to calm down. I pressed the alarm button and knocked on the door, but nobody opened it. After knocking a few more times, the neighbor left it alone, thinking it was just another family argument, just shouting at each other. It happens. So, Pani Susitka went back to her place. But the truth is, this wasn't just another argument. These weren't just ordinary quarrels. At the moment when the neighbor was knocking on the door, Tetiana Litvinova was actually killing her husband. She was stabbing him again and again, in the abdomen, in the chest. One of the stabs hit right in the heart. Serhiy died on the spot, in the center of the apartment, where Tetiana and his two children, a 1.5-year-old and a 3-year-old boy, were present. It's unlikely that a typical Rivne apartment had any kind of super-duper soundproof walls. So the children probably heard everything. Just think about it. The little sons heard with their own ears how their own mother was killing their father. Did the kids see what was happening? It is known that they definitely ran into the room where their mother and father were. So we can only hope that after seeing the horrifying scene, they got scared and ran out of the room. The screams in the apartment on Plastova Street stopped when Serhiy stopped breathing. What did Tetiana do after that? Trying to resuscitate a man with stab wounds, one of which was in the heart, was clearly futile. But who knows if she would have even tried to do that in principle? After the murder, the woman went to the kitchen and returned to the dead man with garbage bags. Tetiana quickly packed her ex-husband and the former living person into these bags and hid them in the pantry. So that it wouldn't be noticeable that her husband's corpse was lying there, she threw all sorts of junk on top. A typical pantry mess doesn't attract much attention, especially in a family with 2 kids, so this is kind of normal. It happens. But there was still the issue of the bloodstains. A knife fight inevitably means there will be blood splatters everywhere, if not pools of blood. Tetiana cleaned everything thoroughly. Then she picked up the phone, called her mother, and asked her to come and look after the grandchildren. She packed her suitcase, grabbed $10,000, called a taxi, and left the apartment for good. At first she made her way to the Kiev region, and then she boarded a plane from Borispil to Egypt. There, a new boyfriend was waiting for Tetiana, whom she had met back in 2016 in that same Egypt. A year ago she flew there for vacation. Tetiana's mother responded to the request to watch the grandchildren, came to the apartment, and couldn't even imagine that there was a body of her. Who is that? What do you call him? Son-in-law. Anyway, that's how the day went by in such an atmosphere. The woman had no suspicion, I'll repeat once again, of what was happening in the apartment. She had enough trouble just taking care of the grandchildren. But then, a day later, representatives of law enforcement knocked on the door. Serhiy Litvinov's friend reported his disappearance. The search started from where he was last seen going. The police started searching every room and were already about to leave. But suddenly one of the law enforcement officers saw something terrible. In the storage room, a man's leg was visible. The police searched through all the junk that was there and found Serhiy, his body, quote, "He was stuffed in a bloody bag, his face covered in blood and hidden under a shelf in the storage room. I witnessed it. Then they covered him with a sheet and placed a stroller and children's items scattered around him. And they did it so that he wouldn't even be found, wouldn't be seen," said the neighbor who was nearby during the police work. Backup arrived at the apartment on Plastova Street. A special operations group worked there for the next few hours. People in uniform documented every detail, questioned witnesses, photographed the crime scene, took fingerprints, and searched for DNA traces. The investigation swiftly identified the suspect as Tetiana Litvinova, as expected, but she became the suspect not only because she and her almost ex-husband regularly had arguments. The thing is, the day before, Tetiana, Serhiy's wife, visited his salon and took all the money that was there. And there was quite a lot to take. Shortly before the events of February, Serhiy Litvinov sold all his property, including his car and apartment. He planned to invest the money into a business, but lacked time. Within a few days, the DNA results were ready. The stab wounds were undoubtedly inflicted by his wife, Tetiana Litvinova, who was put on the international wanted list. While the 2 children of the deceased were taken in by his friends in Ukraine, the woman, the mother of these children, was trying to arrange her life as best as possible in Egypt. But eventually she was caught. There are several versions of how this happened. Tetiana began applying for residency papers in Egypt, according to one account. It seems she had no idea that law enforcement agencies around the world were looking for her, so she freely contacted government institutions. According to another version, the woman wanted to obtain a divorce certificate from Litvinov or to marry her new partner. Whichever of these 2 versions is true, in the end we have one thing. Tetiana was found, arrested, and extradited to Ukraine, to her homeland. This process dragged on for 2 months. While the law enforcement agencies of the two countries were dealing with paperwork and coordinating the exact date of extradition, another tragedy struck the Litvinov family. The father of the deceased, 77-year-old Ivan Litvinov, could not bear the loss of his son and took his own life. The residents of building number 31 on Vedinska Street in Rivne found the man still alive on the ground at around 3:15 in the afternoon on May 20th, 2017. He jumped from the balcony of the 5th floor. The man managed to say only one thing to the neighbors: "I want to see my son." The mother of the victim, Sofia Zygmundivna, pleaded for a life sentence for Tetiana. The woman's grief was extraordinarily great. Here's her quote from that time. The father also passed away because of her, unable to endure the situation. He jumped from the 5th floor. Less than a week after the death of the murdered man's father, a plane from Litvinova landed in Kyiv called Paik. The woman from Rivne kept her traditional Muslim hijab on and held the Quran during the extradition. Why she did this is unclear, because after that, Tetiana was never seen in this appearance again. And probably you think that after the extradition, the woman was arrested, placed in a detention center, and the case actively started moving forward. That would be logical, but everything was different. Litvinova was supposed to be placed in a detention center, but in reality she was sent for a medical examination because Tetiana claimed she was pregnant. These words turned out to be true. At the time this was discovered, Litvinova was 14 weeks pregnant, so on the day of the murder she was already expecting, although she probably didn't know about it yet. Tetiana was charged under Part 1 of Article 115 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, intentional murder. This crime is punishable by imprisonment for a term of 7 to 15 years. However, pregnancy definitely played in favor of the defendant. A woman who is carrying a child is treated more leniently, even in such a brutal case as murder, intentional. I suspect Tetiana, likely with her lawyer's advice, was speculating on precisely this. She often seemed to feel unwell right in the courtroom. Because of this, the sentencing was delayed. And later, the trial was postponed altogether, because the woman had to prepare for childbirth. While the court case stopped moving forward, the suspect gave birth. This happened in the fall of 2017. The new mother named her third child, a boy, Matvey, and as the father on the birth certificate, she listed her murdered husband. Although the relatives and close ones of the deceased strongly doubted that this was his child. Meanwhile, the court established that Tetiana Litvinova is mentally healthy, so she is sane. Quote, "At the time of committing the act, she did not suffer from any mental disorders that would deprive her of the ability to realize her actions. She was able to realize her actions and control them." Such a conclusion was read out at one of the sessions by the prosecutor of the Rivne Regional Prosecutor's Office, Alexander Stenkiewicz. They also presented Tetiana's character reference, prepared during the psychological examination. She is characterized by activity, egocentrism, demonstrativeness, a developed sense of rivalry, a need for a vibrant life, and a desire for spontaneity and independence. Tetiana did not intend to deny in court that she killed her husband. But it's hard to do that when DNA tests confirm that she is the killer. However, she did not agree with the selfish motive that the prosecution attributed to her. The woman insisted that she killed Serhiy because it was self-defense and that money had nothing to do with it. The money was actually shared, not solely owned by the husband. Litvinova described the moment of the quarrel and the fight as follows. "When he tried to strike, we started arguing, and then the children ran in from the other room. I already had a knife in my hands, but I didn't intend to kill him. I just wanted him to leave me alone. As I was striking, he persisted in trying to hit me. I kept hitting him just to make him stop. Well, admitted, it sounds a bit strange considering that she stabbed him 11 times, one of which was right in the heart." The neighbors heard the man shouting, "Help, they're killing me," according to the neighbor's testimony. So if the woman was in such a bad situation, why wasn't she the one shouting? Why was it the man who shouted that he was being killed? Probably because someone was getting beaten. The investigation and examinations lasted another year and then another one. During this time, the suspect was moved to a room with better conditions because she is a young mother. This room is not like those shown in terrifying stories or movies with scenes from detention centers. In the room where Tetiana stayed with her child, there was a crib, a refrigerator, an electric stove for cooking. There was also a boiler and her own shower. Even a separate equipped children's yard became available for walks. And it seemed that the public was quietly forgetting about the case. Well, somewhere it started to be forgotten. But in 2019, the news about Tetiana becoming pregnant again while in the detention center shocked many. Fourthly, from whom exactly and how exactly, it is unknown. By how exactly, I don't mean anything mysterious, it's all pretty obvious there. I'm talking about the fact that, by law, the woman was not entitled to long visits, and she was not held in custody with male suspects. Therefore, there are two versions of how this happened. The first is immaculate conception, and the second is corruption in the Rivne detention center, which is more likely. At that time, there were rumors that the father of the child was a Rivne authority figure by the name of Kappa, who was also in the detention center. However, Yuri Tkachuk, the head of this institution, insisted it was certainly not the second version, stating the following. The exact circumstances of how she became pregnant, under what conditions, could not be established. It was not possible to determine exactly whether any illegal benefits or advantages were provided by the staff of the institution. She did not receive long visits, as they are only granted to convicted individuals. She is classified as a person in custody. Accordingly, she was not granted any long visits. The nature of the conception could not be determined even by the representatives of the Western Interregional Directorate for the Execution of Sentences, who conducted the official investigation. And Tetiana herself could not comment on this matter, how it happened. Here is a short quote from her. The judge asks, Tetiana confirms being in custody since 2017. The question asks where the child was conceived. In the detention center? I will not answer this question, says Tetiana. As we can see, the only option left is immaculate conception. There are no more of them. And while the court was deciding whether to postpone the case for another year due to pregnancy, or to summon the suspect to court via video link, or still require her personal appearance, Litvinova gave birth once again. Tetiana's fourth child was born in October 2019. In the end, the case was postponed again, and then coronavirus disease 2019 was added to the mix. So it was as if Tetiana was just staying in a detention center with a boiler, a stove, and all the amenities. On November 12, 2020, the mother of Serhiy Litvinov passed away. The woman died of pneumonia and cardiovascular failure at the age of 78, never having lived to see the court's decision. It may seem strange that Tetiana and her defense did not seek to end the court proceedings as quickly as possible. At first glance, no one wins from this and it was already clear that the defendant would be found guilty. She herself confessed to the murder. The physical evidence was not in her favor. However, Tetiana and the defense had a rational reason to be glad, as the court hearings were repeatedly postponed, which I will explain soon. Until December 2022, Tetiana Litvinova was held in a pretrial detention center with her children who were born there. And after that, the court changed her preventive measure from detention to 24-hour house arrest. She moved into a rented apartment in Rivne. The police were required to check once a week whether the defendant had disappeared. And just to clearly illustrate the chaos this case was in, I'll add a few more points. On February 16th, 2023, Litvinova personally attended a court hearing for the first time in a long while. But it was postponed again. Do you know why? Because they forgot to invite the witnesses. Tetiana and the judge arrived, but due to the absence of witnesses, the hearing was postponed. The verdict in the case was announced only on March 1st, 2023, that is, more than 6 years after the murder. Tetiana Litvinova was found guilty and sentenced to 11 years and 5 months in prison, but the sentence was not carried out. But instead, she was released. Why is that? Well, have you heard anything about the Savchenko law? Litvinova had her time in detention and custody counted toward her sentence. Under the Savchenko law, 1 day in pre-trial detention equals 2 days in a penal colony. In fact, Litvinova spent 5 years and almost 9 months in custody. So, after the court's decision in March 2023, she became an absolutely free person who had served her sentence in full. So, I think you guessed why Litvinova and her defense delayed the court's decision and, in general, the resolution of this issue. The victims could have filed an appeal, but who are these victims? Serhiy's mother is dead, and his father as well. So, Tetiana is now somewhere in Rivne just walking down the street. Now's the time to remind you to take care of yourselves, dear ones. If you watched this video up to this very second, you're the best. I love it. Check out this and this too. See you.